Hello and welcome to Wilmington, North Carolina, just over the border of South and North Carolina, and we're here at the Battleship, North Carolina. This ship was a World War II used battleship, and we're going to do a tour. We're going to go inside, we're going to go on top of it, we're going to fly around it, as you can see here, and I'll share some history about the ship all along the way. So, let's get started. First things first, that building to the right there, that is the mini museum and where you buy your tickets to get on the ship. Also, gift shop, of course. So this ship is surrounded by a cofferdam. It's not going anywhere. It is a museum at this point, and they treat it as such. So the Battleship North Carolina, it's known as a BB-55 class ship. It was actually launched in 1941. So this ship was built prior to our engagement in World War II. That's important because when it was originally built, they didn't have the massive primary guns that are seen right there in that image that are there today. Those are 16-inch primary guns in the front. When it was built, it was only 14-inch. It was built during a peaceful time prior to World War II really kicking up. So once the United States realized they needed more firepower, they upped the guns to a bigger size. There was a whole treaty based around naval combat and the size of your weapons, and that's one of the reasons why it was built with 14-inch, but has 16-inch guns today. So, as I said, in 1941, it was commissioned and launched. These style guns here were the inspiration for the cannons on the Death Star. And believe it or not, it only operated for 6 years. 6 years. 1947 is when it was decommissioned. Didn't have a very long life, but it was substantial during World War II. The ship is 728 feet long, its beam is 108 feet wide, and it's got a 32-foot draft. Now, I'm not sure if that draft is fully stocked, with a full crew, or if that's just natural draft. What we're looking at here is actually inside the 16-inch gun turret. So several men were used to articulate the gun, figure out the calculations for the angles and the force. A lot went into every shell that was utilized. And later on in this tour, we're going to go into the underbelly, and you're going to see a very, very impressive feat of engineering. The guts, if you will, of the main gun's components, where it rotates and they can actually reload, and there's like an elevator system to lift the shells up to the top of the ship. We'll get to that in a minute. The first level you have access to in the tour is, I'm going to call this the general crew area. I'm sure there's a specific term for it. If you are savvy to the naval terminology, comment down below, let me know. But this is like the kitchen, the bunks, the showers. This is the common area with the amenities for the crew. So you have your galley here. You can sit and eat. We're going to walk through the kitchen. There's also some small shops. There was, shops on the ship. A soda fountain and a little convenience store, and even a post office so the crew members could send and receive mail. Not sure if these trays in this compartment are original, but I really hope they are, because that'd be really cool to be able to just touch those trays that were used during World War II operations out in the Pacific. So let's get into a little bit more history about the ship as we peruse around. It was launched in 41, and it was up and down the East Coast running training operations and whatnot until Pearl Harbor. When Pearl Harbor was hit, Battleship North Carolina was the first ship to be called out to Pearl Harbor. So it went through the Panama Canal, went over to Pearl Harbor, and it had a huge welcoming from the locals. They cheered the ship as it arrived. Immediately after Pearl Harbor, of course, it went into the Pacific and had several engagements. Those meat hooks are quite terrifying. Just sitting here, all quiet and creepy. And the original scale, or I assume's original scale, for the butcher shop section. And there's the saw for cutting the meat. There are a lot of spots like the staircase here that you're going to see. Keep in mind, if you're touring this ship, there are very, very steep stairs. Dare I say they're ladders. They're more ladder than stairs. So keep that in mind. If you're not as mobile as a young one, or if you have very young ones, it could be dangerous moving around this ship. You got to remember, when it was operational, there were young guys, 18, 19, 20-year-olds running through this ship, getting things done. And safety for navigating from one corridor to another wasn't a main concern. With that in mind, of the sailor running through the ship, during max capacity, during the war, this ship had over 2,000 crew members on it. So you can just imagine these tight quarters, how loud, how rowdy, how hot it would get. It's very telling that when you look at photos of the crew that were taken on the ship when they're doing miscellaneous activities, most of the time they are shirtless. And I assume it's because of how hot and clammy this vessel got back in the 40s. So at the time of construction, this was the battleship for the U.S. Navy. This was the pinnacle. This was high-tech number one. We're going through what appears to be the refrigerator section, by the way, this very creepy corridor with empty rooms. Anyway, what I was getting at, this was the pinnacle of the Navy's fleet at the time. So just keep that in mind as we run through the ship back in the 40s. This was it. This was number one. Now, I mentioned earlier, it only ran for 6 years and it was decommissioned in 1947. After it's decommissioned, it sat around, didn't do much, and it was actually scheduled to be scrapped. I'll get back to that scrapping part, but I just want to point this out. This is a service shaft that runs through the very middle of the ship. So when you look down this hole, you're looking down 7 stories-ish, all the way to the bottom. And the reason for this shaft was, if you needed to get equipment, material, whatever, from the bottom to the top or top to the bottom, you've got yourself a shaft right there. So you can swing a crane over, drop it down, pick it up. It was utilitarian. And I'm sure during emergencies you could also get from one level to another via this shaft. Anyway, what I was getting at about the scrapping, they had this ship scheduled to be scrapped, and the people of North Carolina were not going to have it. So they actually petitioned and collected money until they had enough to actually acquire the Battleship North Carolina. So in the 60s is when they finally brought it into Wilmington, set it up, and it's been a museum ever since. So being the cream of the crop Navy vessel in World War II, this cruise saw lots of action. They actually had a torpedo hit that blew a large hole in the side of the ship, hit a common area of the ship, killing a couple crew members within, and the blast outside the ship actually knocked a sailor off the ship as well. They immediately came back to mainland. I believe they stopped in Hawaii first, buried their dead, and then proceeded back to the States to repair the ship, and it was right back out. Right there, that's the toilet. So just imagine the privacy the sailors had here, I think indecency was no issue whatsoever. You got 2,000 dudes, doing dude stuff, running around this ship, shooting at bad guys. They could care less about your naked butt. They have more important things to worry about. So I'm sure these bathrooms and the bunks were interesting to say the least when it came to the hijinks that went down in these exact hallways. So this here is the galley for the officers. So the officers had a different section of the ship, of the common space, that were separate from the usual seamen that were at the other end that you saw earlier. The officers' quarters were actually right next to the sick bay, which you could tell by the green paint. This whole sick bay area, the dental, the operating room, this was all green painted. And right there, those are the dentist chairs. Dental in the 40s, mildly terrifying. And of course, an operating room. You may think this is very gruesome, but from what I've read, what I understand, not a lot of operating went on here. Yes, there was a lot of injuries, a couple dozen deaths on and around the ship, but this ship stood the test of time. It fought in a lot of battles, and it, I was going to say walked away, but it's a ship. You know what I mean. It was successful in its missions. If you've ever watched ghost hunting shows, the Ghost Adventures, things like that, this ship has been visited by several TV shows that, set up cameras, stay overnight, and ooh and ah at different noises and lights. So, with that being said, there are a lot of ghost stories that go along with this ship. I highly recommend just Googling those, checking them out on YouTube. There's a lot of old crew members that have stories, and people who run the museum that have stories as well. You have to take time and appreciate the extreme feats of engineering that are just in these doors. Meanwhile, it's a 730 some odd foot long ship that has every inch of it utilized. Efficiency was key. They weren't playing around with the use of space. And you're going to see that later on when we go into the underbelly and you see the main gun's mechanics. As we make our way downward to a separate floor, we've left the common area, and now we're in the machinist's room. Now, just imagine all these machines running and grinding and doing their thing. How loud this space must have been. It's deafening if you think about it. Right around the corner from the machinist's space, you start to get into some of the more technical navigation, sonar, the computers of the time that was really the heart and soul of this ship. You can see every knob, every button has a function, and I'm sure there was someone that knew what every single one of them did at one point or another. It's quite impressive to see the size of these machines. That right there is a little sneak hole that runs wires all the way to the top of the ship, and you can also climb up there if you're not claustrophobic. So I would imagine that the technology in the phone in my pocket is probably 100-fold more than what's in this room now. So it's impressive what they pulled off in 1940 with what they had, truthfully. Okay, this is going to be my favorite part of the ship. If you visit Battleship North Carolina, make your way down into the turret's mechanisms. I don't know the name of this space. I'm just going to call it awesome. Go to the awesome room. It's way in the back, way in the bottom, but you're going to go down a couple flights. You're going to pass a ton of 16-inch shells, and then you're going to see this turnstile that is below the gun. So this entire mechanism, as you can see from the ceiling, rotates with the gun. And down below you're going to see different degrees written on the wall so they know which direction they're facing. Above us, above this round space, is going to be the main gun. So if we were to zoom out and leave the ship for a moment, there you go. So in order for this bad boy to fire, it needs all of those mechanics and guts underneath just to rotate, just to reload, to do all that crazy stuff in order to fire a shell. Very, very impressive. And those who are actually down there pulling this off non-stop during battle, hats off to you guys. Just outside of what I'll call the turnstile is the powder room, where there are tons and tons of sealed barrels of gunpowder so that they could pack fresh shells, fresh slugs, and get them up to the 16-inch turret above. Well, everybody, what do you think of Battleship, North Carolina? It's a museum, it's an attraction, it's awesome. If you're in the Myrtle Beach area, I highly recommend taking the about an hour and a half drive north over the border to North Carolina in order to visit the Battleship. So I'll leave you with a nice aerial shot of the ship, and until next time, everybody, take it easy.